I feel like it's not an unpopular opinion to hold that everyone tends to like Assassin's Creed. No matter how old or young you are, everyone seems to have their own favorite Assassin's Creed game. Well, one of my personal favorites is Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and the reason I wanted to talk about the 5th entry in this series just out of the blue like this is pretty simple. I've been listening to a lot of sea shanties here of late, and I decided to revisit Black Flag just to hear those sweet, sweet sea shanties. So, here we go, I guess. This is my review of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. So, in Assassin's Creed Black Flag, most mission structure is the exact same as every single one of the other Assassin's Creed games. You go from tailing mission to tailing mission till, eventually you kill someone, and then hear a monologue and soliloquy about how the Templars were right and the assassins need to just go and die and all that good stuff. However, Assassin's Creed Black Flag mixes up the formula just enough to where it basically changes the game by adding in a ship, and your ship is essentially the center of this whole pirate universe that the game tosses you in. And it changes the game from being, another Assassin's Creed game with really short islands to the greatest pirate game ever made. Now, this does come with both its fans and its detractors. I myself wasn't really a big fan of it at first, but as time has gone on, I have grown to appreciate the ship combat more and more, because I find it really, really good. However, in my opinion, this isn't the game with the greatest ship combat. That would actually be Assassin's Creed Rogue. This is just the one that has the best atmosphere and best combat out of all 3 of the Kenway games. And by all 3 of the Kenway games, I of course mean 3, Black Flag, and Rogue. The weird spin-off where you play as an assassin turned Templar. But that's off topic. We are here to talk about Assassin's Creed Black Flag and Edward's adventures in the Caribbean. Now, as far as the mainline missions go, there are way too many tailing missions in this thing. Like, the game is 70% tailing missions. I checked. And once you get to the end game, you basically realize something, that this game's big gimmick, where Assassin's Creed 3 had the Frontier as its gimmick, Rogue had the air pistol, Assassin's Creed Black Flag's big gimmick is the ship, really. But that's not to say that it's bad. It's actually really good. It's very well done. Top shelf stuff, really. But, you can also raid forts and do legendary ship battles, which is insane. Because the level design on both the destroyed ships and destroyed forts are amazing. However, once you get out of the ship battles and you actually board the ship, I have actually never lost a boarding, and neither will you. Because this is an Assassin's Creed game with the combat where it basically tells you the enemy is attacking, and all you gotta do is hit like O or something, and it immediately does an insta-kill attack. Now, that is your basic gameplay. It's pretty standard Assassin's Creed stuff, save for the ship. What is a pirate game without good ship combat? Well, it's obviously not a very good pirate game, but luckily this game does succeed in that area. It provides some of the greatest ship combat I've seen in any pirate video game ever made. But luckily, the combat isn't all that it does well, thankfully. Now, you can upgrade your ship quite a lot in this game. However, it is not as I would have originally thought, because, you see, in the game there are several points in which you actually get to sail stuff like the Queen Anne's Revenge and other similar ships, and they are huge, massive, hulking ships. But unfortunately, you cannot make your Jackdaw anything close to these ships. It will always be the middle-of-the-road, fast and agile but also pack a heavy punch ship that it is. There is not really any big variation in the builds that you can do for your ship. You can't make it slow but extremely powerful, fast but extremely weak. However, that being said, there is a little bit of variation due to the fact that you can upgrade both the armor platings and the cannon. And the cannons and mortars and stuff like that. So it becomes, okay, what do you want to upgrade first for your ship? Because by the end of the game, your ship is going to be probably one of the most powerful things in the West Indies, and not even a man of war is going to even frighten you somewhat. So it becomes, what do you value? Your mortars or your cannons? Your armor or your heavy shot? And while, yeah, none of this detracts from each other, it's essentially which do you want to upgrade first. And you can't exactly ignore these upgrades. I would not recommend it, because there's a mission about middle of the game where you have to take on a giant man of war, and it is really, really difficult if you have been ignoring your ship. So do make sure that you stay on top of your ship upgrades. But now that we've touched on the upgrades for your ship, now comes the big question: what of the customization? How can you make your ship look? Well, you can't make it look like what you would want, because all you can really customize is your sails, your steering wheel, and of course the thing on the front of your ship that I forget the name of. Now this just affects the way your ship is presented in-game with its in-game model, and it doesn't have any positive or negatives. However, I will say this: while it doesn't have any positive or negatives, it is a bit of a letdown that you can't customize the actual paint on the side of your ship, like the paint of the wood and whatnot. But wait, it also gets worse, because now I'm going to move on from customization to something completely different. Let's talk about some of the side activities to do with your ship. So there are these things that exist called legendary ship battles, and they're essentially just massive man of wars upgraded up the wazoo. Now, you would think that, this would be where the Ubisoft team kind of went a little crazy doing, like, uncanon stuff, because it's a side activity that most players aren't even going to bother with. You'd think they'd throw in stuff like the Jolly Roger, the Flying Dutchman, stuff like that. But no, they actually kept it as believable as possible for ships in the Caribbean, which is a massive letdown to me. Like, I would think you'd be able to take on some of these, like, ships of fantasy, because at one point, and I forget exactly where it is, but if you do the underwater activity that you can come across at the sunken ships, you can come across a little cutscene where a kraken fights a giant squid, I believe. But that being said, we're talking about the actual ship, not really the side activities that you can get into doing at your free time. But you can, as I mentioned before, you can battle massive man of wars like in the free roam. It's not just the one or two legendary ship battles that you can come across, which is a godsend, because this game would get really boring if you beat the legendary ships and then, you couldn't fight any more man of wars, or you couldn't just find them in the overworld. You can also find these ships that are basically like floating banks, and you can get a ton of cash from them. And I recommend, when you get to the point of where you can battle like medium-sized ships, that you start going after the banks, because it will help you upgrade your ship and your personal stuff to where you can essentially become the best pirate in the West Indies. Now, the on-foot gameplay is, as I said before, it's pretty standard stuff as far as Assassin's Creed goes. However, there are a few things that have changed. You see, bar fights have returned, that way you can unlock the bar and whatever little minigame is at said bar. But another thing is you can now recruit crew members for your ship, which is an activity that you're going to unfortunately have to take part in quite a lot, because this game has a very major problem with bugs, and you will encounter most of them mainly when you're boarding another ship or on just regularly on foot gameplay. The one that I tend to encounter the most is I will climb a giant building, and then Edward will, instead of leaping into the hay that I have clearly marked out for him to jump into, he will randomly jump into the street, fall to his death, and then desynchronize. And it's really annoying, especially after you've climbed a tall building and you're really hoping to get like a cool shot, and then it's like, oh yeah, no, I'm just gonna, yeet myself onto the concrete, because that makes perfect sense. Now, what I mean by you will have to take part in these recruitment activities quite a lot. You see, one infamous bug this game had for quite a while is it will randomly despawn your ship, and there will be a giant crater in the water where your ship once was. Or your ship will be flying in midair, and then immediately drop down to Earth, thus killing everyone due to fall damage. Or drowning your entire crew in the giant pit of water that makes it look like Moses just made your boat disappear. You have like one other new gameplay option, and that is essentially the naval contracts, which is essentially just an assassination contract, but now you have to sink the ship, board it, kill the captain, then finish the boarding and all that. So it's essentially adding an extra step, and it's not so much on-foot gameplay as it's something that is both on-foot and on-ship gameplay. Now, in this section, I intend to touch up on the last few things that I would like to talk about. Things such as the story and customization, as well as the OST. So I'm going to start off this little jaunt of the video with customization. Because there isn't really a lot that I want to talk about, just more, I have one pet peeve that I feel no one talks about. And I get why it's not a huge thing, but okay, I'm just gonna get into it. So, in Black Flag, there is only a single costume with a captain's hat. Now, there is a few sailor costumes. That's not the problem here. I'm just saying, why is there not more costumes with captain's hats? I mean, after all, we have the trench coat costume, which doesn't make a whole bunch of sense why it should have a hood. But it does. Why don't the trench coat costumes have a captain's hat? This is just something I started wondering on my playthrough, and now I can't, not think about it, because it's like, there's only one, and it's a Uplay reward. And given that the fact that you can't access the weird Uplay thing since it's switched to the Ubisoft Club, now you just can't get any of the Black Flag rewards unless you download them from another app, and you gotta jump through a bunch of hoops just to get the one actual captain's costume. And I don't know, I just felt like I should mention that. It seemed important. So the next thing I'm going to touch on is basically what the plot is, because the plot, when you boil it down, is really simple. Effectively, this takes the route of Red Dead Redemption 2 and Red Dead Redemption, where it kind of focuses on the death of that era. For this one, it goes from the golden age of piracy to essentially the death of piracy in the West Indies. And the game does a really great atmosphere as it goes on, because you sort of feel like things are closing in for Edward, and Edward's just like trying to hang on to this like piratey way of life, and it's really good, and I can't really do it justice by explaining it. So the story is amazing, but it is a bit of a long one. Now, it's not the best Assassin's Creed story. In fact, I'd say it's on the mid-range spectrum of Assassin's Creed stories, but it is worth your time if you want to get into it just for the story alone. However, the tailing missions really make the story drag on a lot longer than it actually does, because the story's already long, but the tailing missions do not do it any favors, in the slightest. The final thing I want to touch on in this review is the OST, because it is amazing. It's just so good. And I'm not just talking the sea shanties. That's going to be their own thing, because I have a lot to say about that. But the actual OST, like the music in the background and everything, fits this game perfectly. Like, I don't listen to it regularly, but it is one of those games that the OST is very recognizable. You show me a song from this game, I can probably tell you whether or not it's Black Flag or not. And then there's the sea shanties. The sea shanties are by far the best part of this game. They have at least 35 of them, and you can find some scattered around the overworld and pick them up. That way your crew can sing different songs. But the sea shanties in this game are absolutely fantastic, and they are the specific tracks from this game that I have downloaded on my phone and constantly listen to all the time. It's stuff like Drunken Sailor, Lever Johnny Lever, Randy Dandy Boys. It's just, it is so good, and I can't quite do it justice. But by far, in my opinion, the best of the sea shanties is Leave Her, Johnny, Leave Her. Because when you look at just the themes of the story and Edward as a character, you tend to find that the song Leave Her, Johnny, Leave Her feels very personal to Edward Kenway's character. But that gets into a bit of spoiler territory, so I won't talk about it, but just know it is absolutely beautiful and fantastic. So, you might be asking, what are my overall thoughts on Black Flag? Can I recommend the game? Well, I gotta tell you right now, I can 100% absolutely recommend that you go out and check out Assassin's Creed Black Flag. It is one of the best Ubisoft games ever made. However, that being said, it is a absolutely dreadful Assassin's Creed, because it essentially, most of the parts of this game that are Assassin's Creed, such as the tailing missions and assassinations, take their worst form in Black Flag, because tailing missions, which are just terrible in general, are abundant here, and almost none of the assassination missions are that interesting. However, but as far as pirate games go, this is one of the greatest pirate games ever made, if not the best. I know I personally haven't played one that beats it, just in sheer scale and fun factor. Oh yeah, and I forgot to touch on one minor point that I'm just gonna throw out here before the video fully ends, but this game looks at its best either when you're sailing on the seas and you start looking at the water, because the water in this game is absolutely fantastic. It's one of the few games that has made me, like, genuinely stare at the water and go, man, that looks so pretty. But the other thing is this game looks at its absolute peak, in my opinion, when it is just pelting the rain and storming and you're climbing on the architecture. It just looks so good. So with that being said, do check out Black Flag. It is incredible.